So my guest today is Dr. Melanie Sue Hicks. She's a social impact advocate, a writer, speaker, executive coach. She's an expert in human connection and resilience and has traveled over 44 countries. She has spent over 2 decades in engaging in hands-on global philanthropy. Before we go any further, Mel, please could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Well, you heard the highlights. It is my passion to be out of in other places doing service, and sometimes those other places are just my own backyard, and sometimes they're halfway across the world. But I really believe in the power of service and what it teaches us as leaders and as executives, and I bring those lessons back here to America to integrate them in my everyday life as an executive trainer.
So today we're talking about connection and resilience. What actually made you go into that area?
So quite honestly, there were two things. The first was I I spent some intentional time in my 30s really thinking about all this service work that I was doing and trying to figure out, what is the thread? What drives me to do this? Why would when my friends were settling down and having babies or, traveling to all these tourist destinations, I would spend my money and my time off going to places like Nicaragua or Sierra Leone or Nepal. And it was so much more uh, just thrilling to me to do those than to say, go to Cabo or go to Greece. And I really wanted to understand it. And what I realized was that I approached the world with a real researcher brain. And every time I would go on one of those experiences, I was doing what you can't do by looking in textbooks. I was watching people live out resilience, live out human connection in real life, in different cultures, in different situations, in dire straits and in, joyful times. And there was something addicting to me about learning those lessons face to face. And I didn't set out to learn those lessons. Those lessons came to me as the thing that I was seeing over and over and over again, um, regardless of where I was. These were the things that were coming up. And I think the second reason was really about my own experience. I went through a couple of really traumatic events myself and was able, in a lot of ways, I got a lot of praise for being uber resilient. And I thought a lot about, what does that mean? How did I become this resilient? What am I learning about myself? What are the, pieces of resilience that we need in life? And so I thought a lot about resilience based on my own need to heal from just traumas that were going on in my own life. And so those things combined really led me down a path to think about it really critically and really sort of academically in that sense.
Okay, no, thank you for that. So, I mean, connection is very important to everyone.
Mhm.
And when we talk about connection, it also means different things to different people. What is connection and how would you define it in today's environment?
Oh gosh, it's a broad question, but a great one. I think connection is any place where you feel like you are your full self. And that doesn't mean that we're unfiltered or unprofessional. We can all have a more casual side and a more formal side, but as long as whatever you are, when you're in a room and you're able to showcase your talents, to feel genuinely at home, to feel like you really belong in that room, that you're valued, that's where you're making a connection. So people that make you feel that way, organizations that make you feel that way, even just connecting to yourself, being out in nature and saying like, I'm not hiding pieces of me. I'm here to, you know, have a quiet walk to myself and think through things that are going on or whatever. All of that to me is connection. It's about spaces and places and people that allow us to be the spherical beings that we are as humans. And those connections, I talk a lot about um, a phrase called that I say that is not mine. It's accredited to a couple different people, but one is Albert Einstein, which is don't ask a fish to climb a tree. So one of the most important things about connection for me is understanding that there are different types of connection and there are different depths to connection. And there's no judgment on those things. It's actually all okay. And we need all of them. So I tell this analogy around an aspen tree, which is aspen leaves are really beautiful. They make this cool little twinkling, like rushing sound when they blow in the wind. They're light and they turn beautiful colors in the fall, but they fall away. And we have connections and friends and people like that that are there for a season. They're there to bring joy. They're there to add beauty to our lives, to have a single experience with or a series of short experiences, but they're not there for the long haul. And then you have the branches, which are there for much longer, but they're not really there if you have a big snowstorm, a big trauma in your life, a big change. They're not going to be able to withstand that. They're not strong enough for that. And you have your trunks, which are your family, whether that is your chosen family or your blood family. The trunks are there for you. They're there long term. They stay even in the worst of traumas. They're there to support you. And then finally, you have this kind of hidden set of connections that are our roots. And those roots don't have to be big, flashy friendships we talk about all the time or connections. They can be just people who bring a lot of stability and nutrients to you. Sometimes that can be, a religious leader that you are really close to or follow closely. It can be a close-knit set of friends that are really great support systems when you need them, but maybe not around all the time. They can be extended family or pieces of your family that are not only in the trunk, but also in the roots. It's just, they're a special group of people who really keep us grounded and keep us really solid and make our lives really rich. And I think that making sure we have people that fill all of those buckets is the most important thing for us, because if we ask a leaf to be a trunk, we are going to be disappointed, right? And so are they, because they can't provide that for us. And so it's just really important in the world of connections today to really intentionally think about how each person that we come in contact with, each person, and sometimes that's collectively, like a club, an organization, a religious institution, whatever those things are, where do they fit on this model, and how do they fulfill that commitment? And then what's missing? Do you not have your fun friends that you just need to get out with? Do you not have someone you can call at 3 a.m. to cry with? And be intentional about finding those things.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way you've actually, that analogy you've given, because a lot of people do feel disconnected in today's society. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you about your journey and what led you to, I know you mentioned some of the things that led you to focus on connection and resilience, but do you want to give us more highlights on that, or did you actually study connection and resilience?
No, ironically, I studied public policy and organizational communications, which in a way it's interesting because those sound like they would be very disconnected. But organizational communications, which was my kind of first love, was all about communication patterns within organizations. And communication and trust is really the foundation of connection. We will immediately begin to disconnect when we feel a lack of trust, whether that is with our work or another person. That's the first response, is to insulate ourselves from potential hurt if we feel trust deteriorating. And so studying organizational communications at a very young age, in my undergrad years, so 18 to 21, I started instantly to understand the interworkings of organizations and how communication and trust was part of that. And that fed to later. I really, I don't know that my public policy background, although I love that phase of my life and I understand the workings of the economy so much better based on it. I don't know that it really fed this ultimate place I've landed in. But what I will say is my dissertation was about generational differences in the workplace. And what I figured out from that dissertation, I studied a concept called psychological contract. And psychological contract is all about expectation setting and what happens when expectations don't align. And that goes straight back to our need for communication and trust building. Because if you have a situation where you show up at a job and you expected one thing and you're not getting it, you will just sit in that disgruntled unless you have the trust or the bravery or the courage to stand up and say, hey, I had this set of expectations. Can we talk about why those aren't being met? And so many people don't have those things. They don't feel equipped with either, their own courage level, or just they don't have the vernacular or the training to know how to go in and advocate for what they want in a positive, non-confrontational way. And so those are really nuanced pieces of connection, but that's where kind of this journey has gone over the years.
Okay. And so with regards to, today's environment, how can people start to, because I believe that a lot of us don't connect as we should be connecting. So how can people start cultivating deeper and more meaningful connection in the world today? Because we've got the social media, which doesn't help with, connecting with people, although we see people online, but we don't really connect with them once we are offline, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of just really easy steps that I say easy. They're easy to say, harder to do, right? And the first of those is I was talking to a psychiatrist not that long ago who was talking about his patients overall and the trends in the things he's seeing. And one of the things he's seeing is people who were highly uncomfortable during the pandemic in being isolated have actually kind of shifted. They were forced to get comfortable in the uncomfortable. And I think that's a lesson for all of us. We've heard it, we hear it all the time in sort of a lot of different places, like, get comfortable with the uncomfortable. But what happened during the pandemic is we all got comfortable being more isolated. We all got comfortable being more alone. And it almost did a pendulum swing where it makes the idea of reconnecting face to face, the idea of going out and joining a run club, joining a church again face to face, all of these things became a little more arduous than it once was. We started to kind of level down our willingness to put forth effort to get to know people in a face-to-face manner or to show up in places. And connection is really about showing up. It's about showing up for yourself and about showing up for other people. And as we got comfortable not showing up, you can feel that strain on connection. And so the very first thing I tell people is, really dive into your own attic, your own mental attic, find the places that you have real joy, that bring you real joy, and then go out and find other people who like those same things. If you like to run, go join a run club. If you have a deep faith, go find a religious institution that you support. If you like to knit, go find other knitters and meet at a coffee shop and talk about it and share resources. And it can, connection can happen virtually, but it can't happen by doom scrolling social media, right? You're just voyeuring into other people's lives. That's not real connection. If you join an online private group where people are talking to each other and they get to know each other, that's a virtual connection that actually has roots to it and can have a positive impact. But it has to be an active engagement, not a passive one. And that's so much of social media is a passive engagement. And so we have to put ourselves in places where the engagement is active, where we are putting sand in someone else's bucket and they are putting sand back in our bucket in a reciprocity that makes everyone feel good. And that's how trust is built and that's how connections are made. And so the first is just to put yourself out there, get back into spaces that feel a little bit uncomfortable. But do it in a way that is kind to yourself. Do it in a way that's under the umbrella of something you already really care about. And the second is just to be really intentional about connection mapping. Like I teach connection mapping in my workshops, and it's really about deciding, kind of how many leaves do you have, how many sticks or branches do you have, how many trunks do you have, and more importantly, how many do you need? Different people need different amounts of people in their circle to make them feel supported and heard. But if you are missing a critical component of connection, it is really important to go not only to recognize that and acknowledge it, but also then to go out and find it, to find people to fill that niche for you.
I just wanted to ask, you said you do workshops on connection. So I'm sure since after COVID, you must have seen an increase in that because people felt disconnected,
Mhm.
or is that what you've found? Or
Well, I've certainly found that topic has been a popular one. So I do a number of keynote. I run 6 executive programs here for the Denver Metro Leadership Foundation, Denver Metro Chamber Leadership Foundation. And we discuss a whole myriad of topics. And then I also do private keynoting and trainings on my own. And what I have seen is across the board, people are asking for that topic to be part of the work that we're doing. And they want to know, like, how do I get back out there? There's a whole generation of young workers who have never really networked, right? They were in high school during COVID. They went to college where a lot of things were still, off and on. A lot of clubs had shut down, and maybe they came back, maybe they didn't. But no one ever, and they've often worked in remote or hybrid situations, and no one's taught them some natural skills. And there's always going to be people who have that as a natural ability. And then there's going to be others who need the encouragement. They need the actual training on things like connection and networking and mentoring and these kind of things. So I've definitely seen an uptick in the request for that content.
so in your experience, what's the most common barriers people face when they're trying to form genuine connection?
Um, I would say it's what I said earlier, which is asking fish to climb trees. It's asking someone to connect with them on a level or in a manner that that person is not capable of, and then feeling discouraged. Um, and rather than understanding that this is the capacity with which that person has to connect with you, and so therefore you engage them in that way. And then the other uh, is is probably just the effort that it takes. It is scary to show up in a room full of people you don't know. It is scary to join a new group, to get out of your house. If you've worked all day and the last thing you want to do is go talk to a bunch of strangers, right? But everything we do in life, we get out what we put in. So if you want to get out of the circles that you have, if you want to get out of cycles of loneliness or isolation, you have to then break the routine that you've always had, which is perhaps going to work and coming straight home or hanging out with the same 3 people. And you've got to intentionally make efforts to put yourself in places that are new and interesting. And that's how you form new and interesting connections. And when people don't do that, or when they do it on a really, really shallow level, and they guard themselves too much, and they're not giving enough sand out of their bucket, it's really hard for them to make those genuine connections that they're really looking for.
And what would you say would help a person like that? Is it just for them to take one step at a time, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, like finding, determining in what way you would like to connect. Is it over sports? Is it over knitting? Is it over, whatever? And then and make a plan, just like anything else we do in life. Intentionality often comes along with a detailed plan, and hold yourself accountable to it. If I said I'm going to go try out this Wednesday night run club, then make sure that I don't make excuses on Wednesday afternoon about why I'm not going to show up, right? But I'm actually going to show up. And even if it's a little uncomfortable the first time, give it 3 tries, right? Go 3 times. If you don't feel connected in 3 times, try something else, but give it more than once. I always, especially, I do this with restaurants. I never want to judge a restaurant because you might have gotten the waitress or waiter who was just having a really bad day, and they're not actually a really bad server. Or someone called out in the kitchen and someone was put in place to make food that they really weren't that, equipped to do, but it was a last minute thing. But if you give it a couple tries and it still isn't good, then maybe it's not the right place for you. But um, you know, show up, be intentional, make a plan, and then give it a couple tries.
Show up at least 3 times, be intentional, and give it a try. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So you're very well traveled, and how has, connection and, yeah, connection been in different parts of the world that you've been in, and which part has been the most interesting one?
Oh, goodness. Well, they're all wonderful and interesting. I would say the differences are just very much understanding. So, in Sierra Leone, for example, the culture is very open. They're very physical. They hug a lot. They dance a lot. There's a lot of music. There's a lot of just joy, even in situations where, from a Western perspective, we would say, how are they that happy? They have so many struggles, compared to something that the privilege that we have, and yet they're just a very physical culture. And so I showed up the very first time out of a kind of bus situation, from a different city to this school, and the whole group of girls came out from the school, and they all wanted to hug and they wanted to dance. They had loud music playing, and it was so joyful. And then you show up in Nepal. I showed up in Nepal just a few months later, and that culture is very standoffish. They keep to themselves. Hugging a stranger is a very awkward. Any physical kind of touch in public can feel a little bit out of place. They'll forgive you for it, but it's not the norm. And it's just a very quiet culture, but it's no less joyful. It's no less loving. I had just as deep a connections there. It's just different. It's just understanding what the cultural norms are and looking for the ways to connect. I tell this story. I recently told this story at an event that I spoke at, which is I had one of my best cultural experiences ever. I went to visit a school in Nepal, in a village in Chichawan Valley, and the principal, wanted to kill a chicken because I was there to serve chicken for dinner, and they don't eat meat most of the time. So they, in my honor, which was very kind, he went out to kill a chicken, and I was in their kitchen with the wife. And by kitchen, it's just a little tin shack with a few items and a propane gas stove. And she spoke no English, and I don't speak Nepalese, but we were able to sort of communicate enough for her to teach me how to make this entire meal. We picked the vegetables from her garden. She showed me the bottles of spices and sort of showed me how to make things. And we just connected because we were there and we were present. And I did take a few pictures and a little video of it, but I wasn't kind of on my phone, and I didn't have signal anyway to do anything. But there's something about, I was fully present in that moment. I was allowing even our language barrier to not be a barrier in connecting with her. And I think that's one of the things that we don't do enough in Western societies is we go to other places, but we take a lot of our Westernisms and we take them with us there. So we stay in hotels that are either, Western based or feel the same, that are fancy. We don't get outside of the major tourist areas. We don't necessarily mingle with locals very much unless they're like a paid guide, right? And that, I think, is a real sad part about the way that a lot of people travel, because I feel like they miss some of the best connections that you can make, which are made in those small moments when you don't have an agenda, you're just fully present, and you're really understanding where you are through the lens of the people living there.
No, that's amazing. It's so important to know about people's journeys, isn't it? And how
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I've been to several places myself, and I always make sure that I go to the local parts to know exactly how they live. And also, when I'm traveling, I try to at least learn how to say a couple of things
Yeah.
in their language, and especially something like thank you or how can I help you? Those type of things is
Uh-huh.
important to know how to communicate with them, the basic stuff.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, I know that you came up with a concept, or you developed a concept, which is customized to yourself, which is called the 3M method of change. Could you
Mhm.
give us a little bit more about that, and what do they actually represent?
Sure. So the 3E method of change is really a structural outline for examining both individual or group dynamics and moving towards kind of towards a future path, towards change. And so the first E is excavate your attic. And so this is a concept of we can't move forward if we are not recognizing what currently exists. And so I'll use the example of an individual. When I ask someone to sit down and excavate their attic, what I'm asking them to do is to really think about previous experiences, think about the baggage they're taking with them on a regular basis and where that came from. We all carry a lot of things with us from what we've experienced in life, and we have different joys and we have different aspirations and we have different fears. And so really understanding and having a really good self-awareness is the only way to make real change. Because if we go into change without self-awareness, we are somewhat destined to fail, right? Because we're not fully capable of making a change until we understand the truth of where we come from. So excavate your attic is the first thing. The next is
For those people that don't understand excavate, could you just explain what it is?
Oh, sure. Yeah, excavate just means to dig out. So it's very Western analogy, because in a lot of Western homes, we have attics in the top of our home, and it's not a livable space. It's just where we store a lot of stuff. And what happens when people live in a home for a very long time and they collect or gather a lot of things over time, they acquire, that's the word I'm looking for. They acquire a lot of possessions over time, and they'll just start to sort of put them up in the attic for a later date. And sometimes they're saving it for it's their children's artwork that they want to save for the long term, because they think they're going to give it back to their child when their child gets to be an adult. Sometimes it's Christmas decorations, right? But maybe those get old and some of them stay up there and they never even come down at Christmas anymore, and they're up there. And so when I use the illustration of that idea that it's just a place where we put emotions, we put memories, we put past things in I call it, excavate the attic of your brain, which is we store all these things that we experienced over the course of life. We fears and traumas and joys and happiness and old habits and good and bad old habits and friendships and experiences, and we store all that up there in our brain, and we don't always really dig in and rethink about it. Sometimes we put it up there and we just want to forget about it, or we don't even necessarily want to forget about it, but we just do. We put it back there and we're like, and I'll tell you this example. My parents recently found a box in their attic. They were cleaning out their attic and they found a box of my old journals. And so I was on a plane ride back from Ireland, and I had one of the journals with me, and I read it the entire flight back. And I read it sort of cover to cover. And it was this wonderful journey for me to see my high school self and relive with her day to day all the things she was feeling, her, fears about being a teenager, her boy craziness, of wanting that first date or first kiss, that, the insecurities of feeling belonging or not in different situations. And so those are the kind of things I had completely forgotten. So much of who I was at that chapter, because we can't store all of it. I mean, we can't remember everything all of the time. And so it was so wonderful to really have that time to remind myself of some of my own roots and who I am and who the kind of things that built me into the person that I am now. And so that's the kind of experience that I say when you're excavating your attic in this 3E method of change, is to really dive in and figure out what are the foundational elements that affect whatever this change is you're trying to make. And if it's a personal change, it really is what are the pieces that built you to this point in your life and made you who you are?
Yeah, I get, well, my next question I was going to ask is how does the 3E method help individuals to be more grounded, intentional, and resilient?
Well, sure. I think I mentioned before, we have to have a plan in order to make real change. And so the 3E method allows for people a framework to help make that plan a reality. And when you have a plan, you are much more likely to be successful at what you're trying to do. And I think, resilience is a natural tendency, but it's also a learned behavior. We all have resilience within us, but we also often need the help of, structure and plans and guardrails to help us get there.
Okay. And with regards to this method that you brought, how has it helped the organizations you've worked with? Do the people that you've taught, how have they implemented it in their lives?
Yeah, so I mean, when I work with an organization, we're usually talking about, you know, when you talk about that first step, that excavate your attic, you're usually talking about what are some of the cultural norms in the workplace? What has the workplace been through? Has there been a period of time where the business struggled financially, or where they had to do layoffs? Or did they have a really toxic leader at some point that affected the way that people feel about the organization and they're still coming out of that? And so excavate your attic on an organizational level is really looking at organizational culture and how that organizational culture sets the precedent for the way that people show up in the workplace together. And then the other two pieces are eliminate your obligations and embolden your resolve. And eliminating your obligations is really about thinking very clearly about the things that you do, that you do it because it's just always been done that way. And that is very relevant to individuals, but it's also very, very relevant in the workplace. There's a lot of norms that happen, and we just get trained by a person who did it a certain way, and so we do it that way, and no one stops to say, like, is that really the best way in the current environment in the organization? And so when I work with organizations, it's really about taking the same framework and sort of bringing it to the living, breathing organization that is a business or a nonprofit or, some other organization. And so
I know you recently did a TED Talk. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how was it for you?
Sure. So the TED process is very intense. It's wonderful, wonderful process. It's a great way to connect with other people with super interesting expertise, very different than your own. It's a great way to connect with other people who are diligent and passionate about whatever they are diligent and passionate about, and to feel that energy. You work with a coach for months beforehand. You craft a talk that's very specific to their format. So all of those are the behind the scenes things that I would advocate anyone who is really passionate about something to go and give it a try if they have any aspirations of just sharing their passion verbally with others. In terms of my talk, it was called Invisible Snake Bites, Invisible Snake Bites Killing Organizational Culture. And it really harkens back to my original dissertation research on expectation mismatches in the workplace and what that looks like and how that can deteriorate trust. And so the talk, invisible snake bites, the reference there is that we can all survive, we can likely survive a single snake bite. We can get an antivenom, we can fix it. It's kind of a one-time thing. But if you sit in a cage with a snake and he bites you over and over again, you will in fact eventually die. And so the same thing happens with organizations. If you have so many things that are breaking trust over and over again between the employer and the employee, that's going to deteriorate organizational trust, and the employee is going to leave in some manner, because no one is going to their passion for the work is going to die, and so they're going to want to leave. And so how do we help organizations identify and then fix those invisible snake bites that are happening that are deteriorating trust?
Amazing. Have you actually checked how many views you've got on that yet, or?
I have not. I am so bad at the social media tracking situation. I love to get my voice out on social media, but I'm really bad at tracking all of those things.
Well, I will put it in the notes so people can actually watch it.
Wonderful. I would love that. I would love
Yes.
that. And I love to engage in conversations about it afterwards too. If people are interested in talking about it more, I'm always up for that.
Sure. So I've got just a few more questions for you, Mel. So, if somebody was actually watching right now, I know you've mentioned some tips that people could use, if they're feeling disconnected. But what actionable steps can we take today to be more connected to ourselves and to others?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said this a few times and I can't reiterate it enough, which is forming intentionality. There's a lot of shame that can circulate around loneliness, or a lot of shame around admitting that we don't have a robust friend network, or we're not connected to our work in the way that we think other people are, or that we, you know, awake at night thinking about, or wishing we were somewhere else, or scrolling through social media or whatever, instead of, sleeping well, instead of connecting with people. And so I think releasing the shame and guilt around it and just making a plan to go out and be connected to other people. And it is not, it's not without rejection, right? Like I said, you can often, try to make a friendship with someone or join a group, and it just doesn't work right. And you've got to be okay to say, doesn't make me a bad person. That doesn't make me the wrong fit. That was just the wrong group for me in this chapter. And so I'm going to go out, or the wrong person for me in this chapter. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to try again in a different context. And so I think kind of perseverance is a big one. Intentionality and perseverance are probably my two biggest tips. And what that looks like is just trying again, not giving up, finding, getting creative, finding places to connect that sound interesting, talking to people. Go in with a few questions in the back of your mind, or even on your phone. And, one of the things that people, I think, really get hung up on is this idea of perfection. I've got to show up in this room, and I've got to put on this air of confidence, and I've got to be perfect, and people only like me if I do this. But some of the greatest things that have ever connected me with people is things like introducing someone by the wrong name. And then, because I genuinely was mortified, I genuinely was apologetic, we ended up having a laugh about it for years after that. Because we connect on a different human level. You don't need to be perfect to show up in a room and connect with people. You actually just need to be yourself. And so if that means that you need to put a couple of interesting questions on your phone, then be proud, show up and say, you know what? I don't want to just ask you your name and your workplace. I have some questions for you. Hold on one second. And pull up a question and ask them something interesting, right? People will love it. You don't have to, and that helps take the pressure off you to, like, I'm in a new space, and what am I going to ask them? And awkward silences and all of those things. Like, just be intentional, sit at home and craft those questions, and then show up and use them, and people will love it. So I think be yourself, be brave, and be intentional.
That's a great advice. So this one is, how do you see the future of human connection evolve in our digital age?
That's a tough one. I worry a lot, actually, about the disconnect and the growing gap between connection and disconnect. And the best I can do is to continue to talk about this on a regular basis, to continue to remind people that loneliness can have actual physical health problems they say that it is the equivalent, true loneliness is the equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day on your physical health. It's incredibly toxic for people to live. We are neurologically programmed to live in connection with others, to be connected to others. And the world and the digital world makes it really, really easy to not do that. And so I think a lot about that. And what I can do is just a microcosm of, I run programs that are face-to-face. I do talks that are face-to-face. I do as much as I can that is real connection. And I just, I walk around my office on a regular basis, just asking people what they need. And most of the time they look at me like I'm crazy, and they're like, I don't need anything, like, go back to work. But sometimes I think every so often you figure out what people really do need through those conversations, even if they don't tell you. And so to me, the secret to real connection is those tiny moments. We can make the big intentional ones, and we should, but also sometimes it's just those tiny moments. And that's what I hope for. And the best I can do is to exemplify it myself in hopes of inspiring others to do the same.
Amazing, amazing. And it's come to the end of our talk. So if the listeners would like to get in touch with you or find out more about your work, how can they find you?
The best place to connect with me is on Instagram. So my Instagram handle is InPursuit Mel Sue. So InPursuit Mel Sue. That is where I am most active in terms of social media. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Melanie Sue Hicks, PhD. So either of those are probably the best way to get in touch with me. And I answer every comment that comes to me. I will respond to any DMs. So don't be afraid to reach out if you would like to chat.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for honoring this invitation.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. This was a wonderful chat.
Thank you.